I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope in my hands, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The papers for the house I had helped my son, Armin, buy with the savings of a lifetime, sat there quietly, mocking me. My hands trembled, but not with anger. Not with excitement. It was something heavier. Something that made the heart ache with a slow, hollow kind of grief. From the other room, I could hear him. Armin, my only son, speaking to his wife, Sana. The bedroom door was ajar, just enough to let his voice float through. I froze. Every word, every laugh, every casual mention of we, or ours, was no longer meant to include me. Yeah, baby, everything's set. The papers came today, he said, his tone bright, proud, as if sharing the greatest news of their lives. I pressed my hands against the envelope. My heart stopped. Miss Cynthia will finally have her room with the view of the garden, he continued. Miss Cynthia, Sana's mother. Not me. Not the woman who had worked, scrimped, and sacrificed every penny she had so her son could have this house. I sat in silence, memories crashing over me like waves. 6 months ago, Armin had walked into this very kitchen, eyes bright, pleading. Mama, I found the perfect house, he had said, his voice soft, almost trembling. It's everything Sana and I dreamed of, 3 bedrooms, a yard for the kids, a nice neighborhood. But I need your help. Just $20,000 for the down payment. I promise I'll pay you back in 2 years. And Mama, you'll always have a place with us. You'll always have a place with us. I remembered writing those words in my journal that night, trembling with excitement. Finally, I would have a space in my son's life. A place where the years of loneliness could be softened by the laughter of grandchildren and the warmth of a family that, until then, had always seemed just out of reach. But that was 6 months ago. And now, I was nothing more than a source of funds. An invisible appendage of a life that had no room for me. I got up quietly, moving to the window. Rain slid down the glass in long, glimmering streaks. I let myself breathe it in, cold and sharp, but I didn't allow tears. Not yet. My life had been spent giving, working double shifts, denying myself even small luxuries, scrimping, saving. All so I could leave something behind for the one person I loved above all else. And now it seemed that love had been mistaken for obligation. The phone call continued in the other room, slicing through my thoughts. She's fine in her apartment, Armin said. Besides, you know how she is. She always finds something to fuss about. It's better this way, more peaceful for everyone. More peaceful, I whispered under my breath. I sat down again, clutching the papers. Every dollar I had given, every sacrifice I had made, now felt like a silent agreement to erase my own presence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every smile that I had mistaken for affection, every, I love you, Mama, that had been hollow. For 69 years, I had been careful. Never demanding, never inconvenient. Always the woman who gave, who sacrificed, who forgave. Always the quiet presence in the background. And in return, I had nothing. At 5 in the morning, I rose. I made my tea in silence and opened my old expense notebook. Normally, I tracked bills and grocery costs. Today, I began a different tally, every loan, every emergency, every assistance I had given Armin over the past 5 years. $2,000 for a used car. $800 to fix a transmission. $10,000 for school fees. $700 for Sana's dentist. $3,000 for credit card debt. $500 here, $300 there. And now, $20,000 for the house. $48,300. $48,300 in 5 years. All given out of love, all assumed to be unconditional. My hands shook as I closed the notebook. $48,000. 48,000 opportunities to safeguard my own life, my own dignity. And yet, here I was, listening to the plans of others who had no intention of including me. The phone rang. I didn't answer. Then again. And again. Every ring a small intrusion into the growing fortress of clarity I was building inside myself. When I finally turned it on, dozens of missed calls and messages stared back at me. Armin, Sana, even the children, voicemails asking if I was okay. And I realized something. My silence was the first step in reclaiming my life. I made my way to the bank that morning. I want to remove my son as an authorized user on my account, I said, steady and firm. No hesitation, no explanations, just authority. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten: control. Next, I visited a lawyer. I want to revise my will, I said. I need to make changes. I want to ensure my money, my estate, serves me now, and not just my son's convenience. Attorney Michael Carter listened patiently, taking notes. You're not alone, he said gently. Many older clients face similar issues. What are your goals? To divide my inheritance differently, I said. Part to Armin, but part to charities, to women in vulnerable situations. And conditions. He must fulfill obligations to me while I'm alive. Regular visits, respect, inclusion in my decisions. I don't want a situation where my wealth secures my own exclusion. The lawyer nodded. We can draft a conditional inheritance. It's legally possible, and fair. For the next 3 days, I kept my phone off. Silence, which once terrified me, now felt like a shield. Each day strengthened me, clarified my intentions. When I finally answered, it was on my terms. Mama, please, we need to talk, Armin said immediately. I am talking, I replied calmly. We'll speak on my terms. And I will speak the truth. That afternoon, they arrived. Armin's confidence faltered at the door. Sana looked concerned, but unsure. They were used to me being compliant, always available, always forgiving. But today, something had changed. I heard everything, I said simply. Armin froze. Sana's eyes widened. You heard? He asked. Yes. I heard the plans, the discussions about me as a burden, about moving me to a smaller apartment. About the house being theirs alone. I heard every word. Silence. Mama, that's not, he began. I don't want explanations, I said. I want respect. And I want my choices honored. I paused. I am no longer the bank of Mama. I will not provide another penny for your life without receiving respect in return. The $2,000 you asked for will not be given. Not now. Not ever. They stared. Armin's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, shut it again. Sana seemed to struggle to find words. Leave, I said, voice steady. Both of you. Go. Now. And they did. For the first time in years, I felt life inside me. Not because of anger, not because of spite. But because I had reclaimed myself. My money. My dignity. My choice. That evening, I walked alone through the city streets, breathing freely. I stopped at a small diner, ordered exactly what I wanted, and sat by the window. Outside, life moved in ordinary rhythms, couples walking, children laughing, elderly people passing by. And I realized, for the first time in decades, that life could belong to me, fully, without compromise. And that night, in my apartment, I sat by the window, staring at the rain, thinking of the months ahead. There would be calls, letters, and likely pleas. But nothing would shake the clarity I had found. I was finally awake. Finally myself. I didn't cry. I didn't despair. I planned. I organized. I prepared. For the first time in a very long time, I understood that giving is only noble when it doesn't erase your own life in the process. And for the first time, I felt truly free. The morning after I reclaimed my independence, the apartment felt different. Every corner, every chair, every familiar scent whispered of control, of choices made for me and not for others. I brewed my tea, not in a rush, not as a prelude to yet another day of servitude, but for myself. And as I sat by the window, the steam curling lazily toward the ceiling, I made a silent vow: this life would be mine, and mine alone to shape. Over the next few days, Armin's calls grew more frequent, more desperate. But I ignored them. Each ringing tone felt like a tiny test of resolve, and I passed each one with quiet dignity. In the silence, I had clarity, and clarity brought courage. I began to consider what I had postponed for decades: my own happiness, my own ambitions, my own voice. By Wednesday, I had outlined a plan. First, financial security. That meant a new account, secret from everyone who had assumed I was an endless well of resources. I walked to the bank, this time with a sense of empowerment, not fear. Miss Anderson greeted me warmly. "Miss Jones, ready for more changes?" she asked, a knowing smile on her face. "Yes," I said. "I want a completely new savings account. $10,000 transferred from my main account. No one else can access it." She nodded. "Absolutely. The statements can even go to a separate address if you wish." "Yes, please." Post office box. Money that had been used to finance someone else's dreams would now secure mine. I walked out of the bank with a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. Every step on the pavement reminded me of autonomy, the joy of decision-making, the thrill of doing something solely for oneself. Next, the lawyer. Attorney Carter was expecting me. "Ms. Jones," he said warmly, ready to discuss the will changes. "Yes," I replied. "I want my estate divided differently. Armin will still inherit, but conditions must be met. Visits, respect, involvement in my life. Anything beyond that will be directed to charities that support vulnerable women." He paused, impressed by the clarity in my voice. "We can structure it that way legally. It's uncommon but entirely enforceable. And fair." It felt strange, almost surreal, to speak of conditional love in legal terms. Yet, this was my reality. Conditional or not, it would guarantee respect, something I had been denied for far too long. By Thursday, I had a small but deliberate routine. Mornings at the apartment, afternoons walking through the park, evenings reading by the window. For the first time, my life was not punctuated by others' demands. It was mine. And yet, the phone remained silent, except for occasional missed calls. When I finally decided to answer, it was with purpose, not obligation. "Mama, please, we need to talk," Armin said immediately. "I am talking," I replied. "On my terms." When they arrived, I noticed the subtle shifts in posture. Armin's confidence was tempered with guilt. Sana's worry mingled with apprehension. They were used to compliance, to forgiveness without question. That dynamic had shifted, and they felt it instantly. "I heard everything," I said simply. Armin looked pale. "You heard?" "Yes," I said. "And I am no longer silent. I am no longer invisible. I am no longer a bank." Sana's hand trembled slightly as she rested it on Armin's arm. "Mama, we didn't." "You didn't what?" I asked. "Use my love as a resource. Ignore my presence. Assume my compliance." "That is exactly what happened." Armin's face fell. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. "Mama, I'm sorry. I am not asking for apologies. I am asking for change. I am asking for inclusion, for respect, for recognition of my life. Not after the fact, not when convenient, but now. And if you cannot provide it, I will make my own way, separate from you." They stood in stunned silence. For years, the power dynamic had been unquestioned. Now it had shifted irrevocably. "I am done being taken for granted," I said, my voice calm, steady, resolute. "You may have the house, Armin. You may have your plans. But I am reclaiming my life. You will not erase me from my own existence." Sana's lips parted, perhaps to speak, but no words came. Armin's eyes welled with tears. Not for me, not for the past, but for the realization that control had been wrested from him. He had assumed love was unconditional, as a resource, and now he saw it as something sacred, not automatic. "I need you to leave now," I said. And they did. Slowly, reluctantly, with a mixture of frustration and awe. Afterward, I sat by the window, watching the rain blur the city lights. Alone, yes, but not lonely. Alive, yes, and fully in control of every aspect of my being. The next morning, I walked to the park, feeling the cool, damp grass beneath my shoes. I watched children playing, couples laughing, elders moving with deliberate steps. And for the first time in decades, I felt an internal alignment, a life measured by my own choices, not by my sacrifices for others. I joined a small reading circle at the park, a group of older women who shared books, stories, and advice. I had never participated before. Always polite, always quiet, always on the margins. Today, I spoke. Today, I engaged. Today, I laughed. The following week, I opened letters from various charities, researching where I might direct part of my estate. Women, children, families in need. Every letter, every pamphlet, every story reinforced my sense of purpose beyond my immediate family. I realized my life had meaning outside of motherhood and caregiving. It had meaning in empowerment, independence, and self-respect. Days turned into weeks. The calls from Armin became a background noise, persistent but no longer commanding. My heart no longer raced at the sight of his name on the screen. Instead, I answered only when I wanted to, not when obligation dictated. One morning, as the sunlight streamed through my curtains, I sat at my desk and wrote. Not bills. Not reminders. I wrote stories, letters, dreams. Plans for the future that had nothing to do with Armin or anyone else. I wrote about a trip I had always wanted to take, about painting classes I had postponed, about friendships I had neglected. I wrote because I could. And slowly, the world beyond my apartment felt more expansive. Every corner held possibility. Every decision was mine. For the first time in decades, I realized that freedom wasn't about distance from family, or money, or status. It was about reclaiming the authority to live fully in your own life. When Armin and Sana finally visited again, weeks later, the dynamic had shifted further. They came cautiously, uncertain, hoping perhaps that compliance would be rewarded. I greeted them, but on my terms. We spoke politely, honestly, with boundaries firmly established. The power dynamic was no longer theirs. They had to ask, not demand. They had to negotiate, not assume. And in that negotiation, I found an unexpected joy. Not in controlling them, but in asserting my own existence. In defining my presence, my choices, my worth. For decades, I had measured love by sacrifice. Now, I measured it by respect. And for the first time, I saw that love could exist in this balance. Even my grandchildren noticed the change. DeAndre and his little sister began visiting more willingly, not out of obligation, not because of gifts, but because Grandma had become someone they could relate to, someone lively, attentive, and present. The house, Armin and Sana's new life, was no longer a source of tension. It was just theirs. And mine was finally mine. The weeks rolled by, and with every day, I felt a new rhythm settle into my life. The apartment, once a symbol of quiet endurance, now echoed with freedom. I began small projects I had postponed for decades, reorganizing bookshelves, repainting old furniture, planting flowers on the balcony. Each task, each act, was a declaration. I was no longer invisible, no longer expendable. Armin and Sana's calls were fewer now, each tinged with a cautious politeness. They had realized, finally, that I would no longer comply blindly. And with that realization came tension, yes, but also clarity. They were beginning, slowly, to respect boundaries I had never enforced before. One sunny morning, I took DeAndre and his little sister to the park. I had been hesitant at first, unsure how the children would respond to a grandmother who was no longer the always giving, always silent type. But their faces lit up when I arrived. There were games to play, races to run, and stories to tell. And for the first time, I felt the warmth of family not mixed with obligation, but genuine affection. Back at the apartment, I began drafting letters to charities I had researched over the past weeks. Organizations that aided women like me, women who had given all and received little in return, women striving to reclaim dignity in the later years of life. The letters were long, carefully written, outlining my intention to leave part of my estate to causes that truly mattered. I felt a satisfaction that no gift or favor to my son had ever given me. One afternoon, I received a call from Attorney Carter. "Ms. Jones," he said, "I have the draft of your revised will ready. I think it reflects your intentions perfectly: conditional inheritance for Armin, charitable contributions, and clear stipulations about visits and inclusion during your lifetime." "Excellent," I said. "I want to review it carefully. I want it to be precise. No ambiguity." "Of course," he replied. "We'll meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. You'll need to sign in front of witnesses, and the will be legally enforceable immediately afterward." I hung up, feeling a mixture of relief and empowerment. This document, these signatures, were not just legal formalities. They were my declaration. I had reclaimed my life and ensured my presence could not be ignored again. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, reflecting. The house that Armin and Sana now lived in was theirs entirely. The garden view that I had once dreamed of was reserved for someone else. But I no longer cared. I had realized that my happiness was not dependent on proximity to them, but on autonomy, on control over my choices, on living a life directed by my own decisions. The next morning, Armin and Sana arrived unannounced, something they had never done before without warning. I greeted them calmly. "Mama, we want to discuss the house," Armin began. "I am not discussing the house," I said firmly. "I am discussing respect, inclusion, and communication." Sana nodded hesitantly. "We didn't realize, Mama, we didn't realize how much we hurt you." I looked at them both steadily. "You didn't realize because you never asked. And you never included me. I am no longer invisible. I will not allow my life to be dictated by your convenience." There was silence, and in that silence, I sensed the first stirrings of understanding. Perhaps they could not undo the past, but they could acknowledge it. And acknowledgement, I had learned, was the first step toward genuine respect. Over the next few weeks, we began small adjustments. Visits were scheduled with mutual agreement, conversations included me, and for the first time, I felt the beginnings of a true relationship with my son and his family. Not because I gave money, not because I sacrificed, but because I had asserted myself. The day came to finalize my will. Attorney Carter guided me through the signatures and formalities. Every stipulation, every condition, was recorded, and I signed with a steady hand. Conditional inheritance for Armin, provisions for my grandchildren, charitable donations, clear instructions for respect and inclusion during my lifetime. It was all there, legal, binding, and perfectly aligned with my newfound clarity. After the signing, I took a walk in the park, the sun filtering through the trees, dappling the path in golden light. I felt lighter, freer, as though years of burden had been lifted. The world seemed different, brighter, filled with opportunities I had ignored in my devotion to others. At home, I began planning a small art project. A painting series capturing the city streets, the faces of ordinary people, and the subtle stories of resilience I saw every day. Each stroke of the brush was a meditation on freedom, on reclaiming the self, on celebrating life beyond sacrifice. Evenings became a time of reflection and writing. I kept journals filled with thoughts, ideas, and plans for the future. For the first time, I documented a life lived for myself. Each page was a testament to endurance, to wisdom, to self-respect. Occasionally, Armin and Sana would call or visit. The tone of these interactions had shifted completely. Requests for money were absent. Conversations were genuine, about life, family, and shared experiences. Slowly, cautiously, we began rebuilding a relationship founded not on dependence, but on mutual respect. One afternoon, while reading in the park, DeAndre approached me, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Grandma, will you come to my school play next week?" I smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss it." And at that moment, I realized that love could exist without sacrifice. That respect, inclusion, and attention could replace blind giving. That I could be both a mother and an independent woman, a grandmother and a person with her own life. Weeks turned into months. My routine solidified. The apartment, the park visits, the art, the journaling, the measured interactions with my family, all combined to create a rhythm of life that was mine. Every day was a choice, and every choice reinforced the clarity I had fought so hard to attain. I started a small community group for older women in the neighborhood. We met weekly to share experiences, support each other, and discuss ways to maintain independence. The group quickly grew, and I found myself surrounded by like-minded women who, like me, had spent decades prioritizing others over themselves. We shared strategies, laughed, and sometimes cried together. But always, we left empowered. Through this group, I discovered a purpose that transcended my personal grievances. My life had meaning beyond the walls of my apartment and the family that had taken my love for granted. I was making a difference, small perhaps, but tangible and real. Armin, observing these changes, seemed to respect the distance I maintained. He no longer assumed compliance. He began to demonstrate understanding in subtle ways, checking in, including me in decisions that mattered, asking for advice without expecting unquestioned agreement. Sana, too, transformed. Her demeanor softened, her respect for my autonomy evident in the way she engaged in conversations, asking rather than directing, listening rather than assuming. The children, DeAndre and his sister, thrived in this environment. They learned that Grandma Dolores was not just a provider of gifts, but a woman of strength, wisdom, and independence. Their admiration for me deepened, and our bond grew in a way that was authentic, meaningful, and enduring. And so, life settled into a new rhythm. Not the one I had envisioned in my younger years, nor the one I had sacrificed for, but a life that was richer for its autonomy. The house, the money, the arguments, all faded into background noise. What remained was dignity, clarity, and the knowledge that I could shape my existence without compromise. At night, I sat by my window, the city lights shimmering below, and reflected on the journey. I had given, loved, and sacrificed, yes. But I had also claimed, asserted, and redefined my life. I had learned that giving without boundaries can lead to erasure, but asserting boundaries can lead to respect. And in that realization, I found peace. Not just peace, but a renewed sense of life, purpose, and joy. For the first time in decades, I truly smiled. The world outside continued to turn, as it always did, full of challenges and triumphs, of joy and sorrow. But inside, I had found a sanctuary. A space of autonomy, choice, and empowerment. A life fully my own. Weeks turned into months, and the apartment transformed into a true sanctuary. I no longer moved around the space as if I were just existing, I lived here. Every corner reflected choices I had made for myself, not for anyone else. The small balcony garden bloomed under my careful tending, a symbol of nurturing that didn't depend on anyone's approval or demand. Each morning, the sunlight warmed me as I sipped tea, reading newspapers or journals I had ignored for years. One day, as I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of chamomile, there was a knock at the door. I paused. Armin, Sana, the children. But when I opened the door, it was Mrs. Leonida, my neighbor and longtime friend. Dolores, I thought I'd stop by, she said warmly, stepping inside. I brought some pastries and thought we could have tea together. I smiled, feeling a quiet joy I hadn't realized I missed. Of course, Leonida, come in. We sat, ate, and talked for hours. Not about obligations or favors, not about crises or needs, but about life, memories, and laughter. For the first time in decades, I felt the simplicity of friendship, the unburdened joy of human connection without expectation. Leonida reminded me that there were other ways to give and receive love, through companionship, through shared stories, through understanding. That evening, I reflected on how much my perspective had shifted. Love and respect were intertwined. Giving money alone did not guarantee affection, asserting boundaries could cultivate genuine connection. I realized I had been teaching Armin and his family how to take, not how to honor. And in reclaiming myself, I was now teaching them another lesson, through example, not instruction. Days continued in a gentle rhythm. I volunteered at a local women's community center, sharing my experience and offering guidance to those who had been similarly exploited or undervalued. Their stories resonated deeply, and their gratitude gave me a sense of purpose beyond the confines of family disputes. Each smile, each word of thanks, reinforced my belief that autonomy and compassion could coexist. Meanwhile, Armin and Sana's relationship with me evolved subtly but significantly. They respected my independence, no longer assuming that my love was a tool to be used. Our interactions became calmer, more thoughtful, and more authentic. They began inviting me to family events, not out of obligation, but because they truly wanted my presence. And for the first time, I could participate on my terms, choosing when and how to engage. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window, watching the drops slide down the glass, reflecting the life I had built. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made, the years I had given without question, the money, the time, the energy. And I realized that those sacrifices were not in vain, they had shaped me into the woman I had become, resilient, decisive, and empowered. But they were no longer the only markers of my value. I had claimed new markers: independence, clarity, and self-respect. That evening, I received a phone call from Attorney Carter. "Ms. Jones," he said, "I wanted to confirm that everything regarding your will and accounts has been finalized. You have successfully established both security and boundaries. I think you should be very proud." "I am," I replied. "I finally understand that giving does not require erasure. Respect and love can coexist with independence." He laughed softly. "Exactly. And you've set a precedent for your family as well. They may not admit it yet, but your actions have created lasting lessons in responsibility and respect." As the weeks went by, I noticed subtle changes. Armin began checking in more often, genuinely, rather than with expectation. Sana sought advice, not assistance. Even the children were more engaged, more attentive, noticing that Grandma Dolores had grown into someone they admired beyond her generosity. I took on new hobbies as well: painting, journaling, photography. Each activity was a celebration of personal growth. The apartment transformed into a creative haven: canvases propped against walls, journals stacked neatly on shelves, photographs capturing life's subtle moments. My sanctuary was not just a home, but a canvas of self-expression. One sunny morning, I received an invitation from the Women's Community Center to give a small speech on empowerment. Nervous but excited, I accepted. Standing before the group, I spoke about the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, and of the courage to reclaim one's life. The applause, the nods of understanding, and the tears of acknowledgement filled me with a profound sense of purpose. For the first time, I felt that my experiences, my pain, my sacrifices, my clarity, could serve as guidance for others. That night, walking home, I reflected on the journey. The apartment, the garden, the routines, the community, my relationships, they were no longer a series of compromises but a network of choices and deliberate actions. I felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that I had built a life that could sustain me emotionally, financially, and spiritually. A month later, Armin and Sana invited me to their home for a family dinner. I arrived, not as a giver, not as someone obligated to participate, but as a guest with boundaries and dignity intact. The house was beautiful, the garden flourishing, and the children running about, full of joy. I joined them at the table, engaging in conversation, sharing laughter, and observing the warmth of family on my terms. During dessert, Armin leaned toward me, his voice quiet. "Mama, I think we finally understand. We shouldn't have taken your love and support for granted." I smiled softly. "It took time, Armin. And lessons are sometimes painful. But the important thing is that you are learning now, and respecting the space I have created for myself." Sana nodded. "We will do better, Mama. For real this time." I acknowledged them with a simple nod. No more words of reprimand, no more accusations. The lessons had been learned through experience, through actions, not through arguments. Returning to my apartment that evening, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house, the money, the control I had once given away, none of that defined me anymore. My worth was inherent, my life my own. I poured a cup of tea, settled by the window, and watched the city lights flicker, knowing that I had finally reclaimed both my life and my dignity. The days continued in this rhythm: mornings of personal reflection, afternoons of social engagement, evenings of creativity and quiet joy. I no longer feared being alone, nor did I rely on others for validation. My autonomy was a shield and a source of deep satisfaction. I also began mentoring younger women, guiding them on financial independence, boundary setting, and emotional resilience. My story, once a private struggle, had become a tool for empowerment. I realized that my life's challenges had prepared me to be a teacher, a guide, and a source of strength for those navigating similar paths. Armin and Sana's visits became more comfortable, more balanced. We shared meals, conversations, and stories. The children laughed freely, and I engaged without fear of being exploited. The dynamic had shifted permanently, and I cherished the newfound equilibrium. On a crisp morning, I stood on the balcony, tending to my flowers. The city stretched below me, alive with movement, life, and opportunity. I felt the warmth of the sun on my face, the cool breeze in my hair, and the solid ground beneath my feet. My heart, once burdened by disappointment and exploitation, now beat with clarity and freedom. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to live fully, to love without losing oneself, to give without sacrificing dignity, to claim life on one's own terms. My apartment, my garden, my routines, and my community all reflected the choices I had made, the lessons I had learned, and the strength I had reclaimed. As night fell, I sat by the window, a journal in hand. I wrote of love, respect, boundaries, and independence. I wrote for myself, for the generations that would follow, and for the women who would walk paths similar to mine. Each word was a declaration, a celebration of resilience, and a promise that my life, my choices, and my dignity would never again be compromised. The city lights shimmered below as I closed the journal. I smiled. For the first time in decades, the life I lived was fully mine, filled with purpose, autonomy, and unshakable peace. I had survived, I had reclaimed, and I had flourished.